Hey, welcome. It is Wednesday, January 22nd. January's almost over, everyone. We have a programming note. This is not Jason Buckle, Delegate Buckle. Jason Buckle is running around the halls of Annapolis, or the streets of Annapolis, around there doing legislative important business. So he had to cancel us. But we have the great Michael Musante, fellow colonial from GW, to join us, and we're going to be talking about all things school related and charter schools and everything under the sun. Welcome to the show, Michael. And Mark is the co-host, and the other co-host, Jackie, she's also running around the streets of Annapolis with YRs doing some stuff. Anyways, take it away.
She is also another Georgetown
GW.
Parish GW graduate, like the rest of us. So, God, that was a terrible thing to say. I would almost, if we weren't live, I'd say just stop and go back, but we can't do that. Michael, we've had you on before.
Yes.
And what probably for those who remember, it would be great, but you really did a great job of describing both the history and the operation of the DC charter school program. And it is now one of the oldest. It goes back, forgive me, 30 years, just about, I think, 95,
Yep.
96.
Yes, that is correct.
And it is also one of the most extensive. I think the last time we talked, it was about half the students in public school students in DC were in the program. So just tell us, where does it stand right now in terms of size and what have you?
Well, I wish I could report good news. Sadly, you would think after 30 years of being in existence that, you would be in a stronger place. But it's still about just under 50%. So it's still roughly 46, 47%. It's been that way for the last, like 12 years. And that's due to a couple of things. Um, the Public Charter School Board has really come under pressure to stop the approval of schools. So inevitably, what's happened is they've allowed one or two to be created, but in the meantime, some close, some, contract. And so the population of children who attend a public charter school has stayed roughly the same as it has. I will also simply say that there has been even further encroachment on the autonomy of public charter schools in the District of Columbia. So instead of sort of death by 1,000 cuts, I think that cuts are deeper. And a number of the charter schools are really just being bogged down. And so it's not a great story to tell in comparison to some of the other states in our union that have really passed charter school laws and are now starting to push hard for more opportunities for families.
You might, though, just describe a little bit about how families get their kids involved in the program and what that process is, because obviously there's I think it's fair to say a somewhat complex system in which the people uh, set up a kind of hierarchy of what their priorities are. Can you explain a little how that goes?
Sure. And what's interesting about it is just to add a little historical context. Before and let me just say that I'm not sure how I feel about either way, right? So in the old days, when you wanted to go to a charter school, you would, as a parent, go and visit, right? You make a short list. It's almost like a college search. You go and you look at the schools that you're interested in. You tour them. You talk to the heads of schools or people that you know, and you go and take a tour of it. And then probably about now it's probably been about 15, maybe 12 to 15 years ago, there came the integrated application process, right? Where you basically go online, you fill out, and to your point, you rank which charter schools you're most interested in, and then you submit that application. and then you hope for the best. And it really is what school has space. And then, much like ranked voting, once a school is filled, then it goes to your second choice. If that school is filled, it goes to your third choice. And then you have the opportunity to take whatever school you may have gotten into and take that spot at that school. It takes some of the work out of it for the parent, but one might say that a parent had to do a little more work and was probably better, because then you were far more engaged in your child's educational choice and really had to do your homework. So you can look at it either way, but that's basically how the process works. And that was implemented across the city by the Public Charter School Board, again, to make it just a little bit easier, because to argue the other side or play contrarian, it is very difficult for a parent who's probably working, or two parents who are both working, to fill out 5 or 6 applications, make sure that all have different deadlines, making sure you're getting them in and on time, along with proof of your residence and all of those other things. So, having a one application for multiple schools and a ranking preference probably saves a lot of time and heartache for parents of the city.
So, what is the composition of parents that apply, and do some families not get any of the choices they make?
That's a very good question. At some point, I think everyone gets at least one of their charter school choices. What you see is it's very difficult to get in a charter school around 4th and 5th grade. It's easier in the higher grades, and it's easier to get in coming in at like the high school level in 9th grade, but it's very, very incredibly difficult to get into a charter school in the first 4 grades. I think that's the toughest time. You're in competition with a lot of the families in the District of Columbia who have younger children. It makes it far more competitive. And if you are in attendance to a traditional district public school, or any sort of other maybe private school that you're interested in, and then you transfer in around 5th or 6th grade, it's much easier. But I think that almost all of the even though some schools have very large wait lists, I think fundamentally sooner or later you get into a school, whether it's your first or second choice. I think by the third or fourth choice, you're finding a spot for your child.
We probably could go on for quite a bit with the DC school system, but you've had now a fair amount of experience with some of the other states, some of the other programs that have been set up. So, would you pick another one that you think does a better job and explain how they're different?
With charter school,
Hopefully with charter school programs. Now, hopefully that's a nice leading question for you.
yes,
Nice.
no, yeah. I think, look, at the end of the day, your top 3, 4 states for charter schools, where you have large populations, large numbers of charter schools, high performing charter schools, but then also a lack of um, government interference as well in the way of overregulation. So you look at Florida. Florida is probably number one with their law, number one with the number of charter schools and the performance of those charter schools. Obviously, that started many years ago with Governor Bush, who pushed very hard, who was always a huge education choice champion in Florida. And he really started off the big push towards more options for families, and charter schools at that time was the main way to go. Arizona has a very strong and thriving charter, even under this current Democratic governor. Sorry to be a little biased, but you know, governors who are interested and more supportive of educational options for families, 9 times out of 10 are going to be Republican. It's just a fact. It's not a bias. It's a fact. But you look at Arizona, and even with this governor who is not as supportive, there's still an incredibly robust and healthy charter school movement in Arizona. You used to have an incredibly strong charter movement in Michigan. Michigan has fallen. Again, overregulation has pushed a lot of charter schools out of business. It has made it very difficult to operate in Michigan. Ohio has an incredible charter school movement. And one of the best things about Ohio is they have charters that stretch all the way from, you know, kindergarten all the way through an incredibly strong adult education and workforce development charter school sector. And I'll mention one by name if you don't mind. Oakmont Education is a phenomenal charter school group that started in Ohio around the Cleveland area and are now expanding into Iowa. Why are they expanding into Iowa? Because Governor Kim Reynolds is a phenomenally innovative governor who said, if I'm going to have an educated workforce, if I'm going to give great options and have families move here, then I want the best and I want to be able to expand and even capture. And so, what Oakmont, I'm sorry, I didn't say this, but what Oakmont's main point and what their main mission is to take children who have dropped out of school. And not only do they graduate with a high school diploma, but they earn a certificate in an industry where they know there is work, right? So now you're not just getting a certificate in something that, oh, great, I have a certificate. They are purposely focusing on where the need for employment is in the state that they're located in. So they focus heavily on home health care providers. And by that, they're training people to ensure that they can take blood pressure, they can monitor blood pressure, they could draw blood if they need to. They can do a lot of things that, low level medical trainees would do. And so when you look at these states like Arizona, like Florida, like Ohio, West Virginia passed their charter school law 3 years ago. And they are now embarking on this great place. And one of the best things that I love, and there's a phenomenal state senator, State Senator Rucker, who really made the push for charter schools and the Hope Scholarship, which is West Virginia's voucher program. She sees and asks and calls charter school experts around the country and says, where did you make your mistakes over the next 20 years? Where did your law run afoul so that your charter school community or your charter school legislation no longer supported the community and what it was trying to do? So she's looking at, let me solve these problems now. Let me account for things that happened in Washington, D.C. and Michigan to slow the growth of charter schools. And how can I make them the most successful they are?
So what are the things that you told her?
Well, the best tenets of a charter school law are very simple and very straightforward. One, you give them autonomy, so they are not part of the traditional system, right? They are not part of the education, the pre-existing bureaucracy that exists. So they're not being, again, overregulated to death. Because what is a bureaucratic, dominated, adult first traditional public school system going to do to competition that that gets brought into existence? They're going to strangle it to death, right? And so you get a waiver from most regulations. Obviously, safety, health, fire codes, things like that are all kept into place. But your teachers don't have to be a part of the union. You're not part of the same one size fits all curriculum being handed down by, a superintendent and dictated to you by a bureaucracy. You are designing your own curriculum based on the kids that you want to serve. If you want to be a foreign language school, great, design that, and that's what everything is built around. Of course, you're still going to have to teach, a full curriculum. Children still need to receive math, science, and things. But the great thing about it is, and I'll tell you about one fantastic school in Delaware, it's Greek immersion. They teach the Greek language. And someone said, "Well, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Why would you teach the Greek language?" Well, guess what? Guess what 90% of our science terms are based off of? The Greek language. Guess what you can teach in math that's based on the Greek language, right? And so they teach children in an immersion style Greek. And when you come out, it's almost like learning Latin. It's the basis for all of the Romance and European languages. So I'm sorry, why do you think that's a problem if you're going to give a kid an incredible foundation, right? So back to your original question. The second thing is you should have multiple authorizers in your state. An authorizer is a body that creates, monitors, and if necessary, closes charter schools. So when you look at a place like Ohio, universities can authorize charter schools. Indiana has a university authorizer. New York has the SUNY system that's an authorizer, right? In Washington, D.C., you had two authorizers. You had the traditional State Board of Education, and then you had a body that was set up to be an independent authorizer, the Public Charter School Board, right? You want a second authorizer, and that's not related to the traditional system. So in most states, when they write their law, and you're only down to, I believe now it's only 4 states that don't have charter school laws. So you're really at the sort of end of the charter school movement. Does this work? Well, of course it works, because 46 states have passed charter school laws, but you want a different entity so that if you get turned down by the traditional school district, right, you can go to an independent body and say, I have this great idea. I want to be a theater and arts centered charter school. And they're going to look at that and say, great, if you have a group or a community that's looking for something like that, and you think you're going to have enough students to operate successfully and financially you can do it, great, let's go through. And it's not like this is, they're giving these charters off the back of a truck. This is an incredibly rigorous. Someone once came to me, wanted to start a charter school in Washington, D.C., and said, "Hey, can you do this for us?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. I don't have the time. You need a lawyer, you need an accountant, you need a business that you've got to pick a board first." I said, "This is just not fill out an application and get a charter school." But then the final thing I would say, I mean, there's a lot more to the perfect charter school law, but fundamentally, it's autonomy and freedom from overregulation, multiple authorizers in your state that can give different opportunities for anyone who wants to start a charter school to go to. And then the final one is the money, full funding. Too often in many states, charter schools only receive a portion of what the traditional public school district gets. So, Mark, you go to the traditional public school down the street, and the per pupil funding that you get, that your parents would get as you're a little kid for going to that school, let's make the math easy, $10,000. You're worth $10,000 to that school. Now, if there are other things that accompany you, like let's say you're an English language learner, you might get a little more money added on. You may have special needs or some sort of a disability, you might get a little more money added on. But fundamentally, you're worth $10,000 to that school. Your parents now don't like that school and they withdraw you, and they're lucky enough to get you into the charter school down the street. The chances are you're probably only going to be worth $7,500 or $8,000 to that school. And you say, well, wait, hold on. Fundamentally, that's unfair. My parents are taxpayers. Shouldn't every dollar follow me to that other school? Absolutely, it should. Does that happen? No. In most cases, in most states, it doesn't. And the even bigger sin for all the fiscal conservatives out there, the traditional school district usually ends up keeping that extra $2,000 or $2,500 that didn't go with you. So now you have a school. Yeah, now you have a school that's that's teaching one less student but getting an extra $2,500. What are they doing with the money? Where is it going? Right?
Teachers'
So
lounge
let's,
renovations. But Michael, got a question for you.
Yeah.
Philadelphia years ago used to have, I mean, you think of Philadelphia, it's bureaucracy city, but they, back in about 10 years ago when I visited Philadelphia, they had probably a charter school on every other block. How is it that, you don't think of Philadelphia being able to maintain so many good charter schools? They had a charter school for engineering, a charter school for architecture, they had a charter school for arts, they had a charter school for IT, web, and so on. How, the fact that, if a city like Philadelphia can maintain and push through, if you can get those, why is that a state like Maryland? I think we have 3 now charter schools, maybe 4 in the entire state of Maryland.
Yeah, I think
our governor,
yeah, go ahead,
and
please.
Our governor, who used to be a strong advocate of charter schools until he ran for governor, and then he basically fell in line with the teachers unions. But if a city like Philadelphia, which is overwhelmingly Democrat, you think a state like Maryland could manage to have more than 4 charter schools in their state? I mean, that's pretty much what would save the city of Baltimore, I think, from the cycle of schools to the jail, so to speak.
Yeah, I would add that I think your Catholic schools and your other religious schools are probably saving Baltimore a little more than charters. But yes, I would agree. Fundamentally, it's educational opportunity that is. One of the things that you have, though, if you remember in Pennsylvania, is you have a legislature that is often controlled by Republicans that continue the flow of funds. That's the critical lifeline and why you still have Philadelphia charter schools thriving. And there are some fantastic charter schools. You're exactly right. A very dear friend of mine has a phenomenal charter school in Philadelphia. The other thing that's happened in Philadelphia is you have a number of if you want to say, quasi celebrities or Philadelphia based music and other individuals who are influential who've now seen that it works. Meek Mills happens to be a rapper who went to prison, was absolutely turned by his prison experience. He looks back and says, if I had a great teacher, if I would have had a great school, if I would have, if my education had been stronger, I would have. I mean, not that he hasn't done great. He succeeded phenomenally because of his rap music career. But he's now getting involved in charter schools because he sees them having the freedom to be able to do something and start like a recording or music centered, to your point, arts, right? Sort of charter school themed, curriculum. And so I think a lot of it has been dependent on the fact that there's a lot of support coming from Harrisburg that helps keep the Philadelphia charter school movement moving. If you look at the legislature here in Maryland, you're running into a brick wall if you're a charter school.
So you put your finger on, obviously, the issue of it's a state-driven policy in most jurisdictions that makes that decision. What's interesting is in Texas, this has become we're kind of early stages, as I understand it, but we had an effort by the governor to elect, although there's a Republican legislature, elect Republicans who also supported school choice. Talk to me a little bit. It's probably interesting, first of all, to talk about, if you're familiar with what are the opposition. I think, as I understand, it was a lot from rural districts who were worried about their own school district. Talk to me about a little of how that works out.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that you've seen in Texas is in the rural districts, often the school district is actually one of the largest employers, right? You have a consolidated rural high school, and you have teachers, you have nurses, you have school bus drivers, you have custodians, you have cafeteria lunch servers, right? Inevitably, the district itself is a huge employer. And here you have, and then also, and this is my understanding of assisting with a lot of the grassroots on the ground in Texas to help push. In many cases, you have Democrats who run with a Republican name because they know they're not going to win as a Democrat. So they run as a Republican when, in fact, their politics are probably a little more left of center. And there's a strong influence by those who would stand up and say we don't need education choice. And one of the strongest talking points that the other side used in the pushback against what Governor Abbott was trying to do in passing his education savings account bill was you'll lose your Friday night lights, right? All of these children will leave the local high school. It will lose money, and they'll have to stop playing football. They'll have to stop. They won't have enough, and they'll have to close down. Okay, well, that's a scare tactic. But the fact of the matter is, it fundamentally keeps children locked in a school that may or may not be working for them. And
Right.
I think the one point of that, though, is no one is saying, and there was even talk at one point of, we'll make it optional for certain populations. So if you have a rural district, and let's say you only have 100,000 students in the whole district, then, it's up to the people of the district vote on it on your next ballot initiative, or let the school board decide. Now, most school boards are going to side with keeping that one school district and you're zip coded to it, and that's it. That's one idea. Other people said, well, there aren't enough private schools in those rural areas anyway. So honestly, why don't you limit it to the bigger cities? Because that's what you're shooting for, right? You're shooting for your urban centers where Black and Hispanic students have not been able to succeed due to, an education structure that was built for not them. Let's say it that way, right? So so Governor Abbott tried to push this through. He had a number of he had a deal on the table, and then he had a number of about 17. I think there was at the end it was about 21 legislators who ended up voting against it and killing it. And then with a lot of support, both inside and outside the state. 17 of those legislators were defeated. I think 3 more chose to retire. There might be 1 left. And he's going to go back at it and hopefully push through an education savings account.
Now explain how a savings account, say, differs from, say, well, we just talked about in detail the way DC works, the funds go forward. Talk about how a savings account is a different process.
Yeah, so you have 3 types of other educational choice. A voucher is exactly what it sounds like. A family gets a voucher to go to a school. It's $7,000. The tuition at the school, is either 5 or 10 or whatever, and either you have a surplus or you have to make up a difference, and that's done through a scholarship fund. An education savings account is much like an education savings account that you use for college, your 529, right? So wait, 529 or 527? I get them all
529.
confused. 529. Yeah, I have one for my own 2 children and can't even remember what's correct sometimes. But an education savings account is basically you're putting money into an account that you get a deduction from your taxes that can then be used for your children's education, right? It's very simple and straightforward. In fact, and then you also have the potential, and then another program is the tax credit, where either you or corporations or individuals can donate money to an education granting organization. And this is how Pennsylvania's is set up in Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs, where you, Mark, Dwight, we all could donate. We get a tax credit, and then families who are eligible could then go apply and get those funds to attend a school as well.
And here's the other hell. Now, we had COVID, we had the lockdowns. how have charter school, I don't know if there's even any statistical, charter school test scores compared to the public schools during the same period? Have they pretty much, the charter schools kids have done better than, say, your run-of-the-mill union-run public schools?
Well, to be honest, it all depends. It all depends on where
Mhm.
and what state. Quite honestly,
Mhm.
and a lot of that was based on, what states gave more flexibility to schools to do what they needed to do and
Mhm.
use the tools that were available to them, or others that put on draconian rules about in person. I will tell you that, like I said, in Washington, D.C., Friendship Public Charter Schools, which is now open in Bowie, Maryland, was actually one of the first schools to start education immediately. They did it first online, and then as soon as kids were permitted to go back into the classroom, they were ready. Now, one of the other things they did, they continued their distribution of breakfast and lunches and education packets. So they would call each class to come to one of the any one of their number of campuses in Washington, D.C. They have 7. And the children would go in, they would get the food, they would get their packets, and then they would be on their way back to their home where they could connect via Zoom. But they had that working and functioning where you had in Fairfax County, one of the wealthiest counties in this country, who said, no, we got nothing for you, and literally was out for what, 3 months, I think, without any education whatsoever. And so in that case, you had charter schools in Washington, D.C., serving this population that supposedly are always, the most difficult to learn, doing great things. You had that happen in Florida as well. You had that happen in a lot of places. So I think at the end of the day, I apologize for not being able to give you like the most direct, honest answer, but the most direct, honest answer fundamentally is it really depend on what state you were in, and those states that I mentioned that give schools more flexibility via the law and regulations were the ones that did the best and outdistanced their traditional counterparts.
So we were talking about the different funding mechanisms, the Hope Scholarship, the tax credit I mean, the vouchers. Which system do you recommend, or does it depend on different circumstances?
Well, honestly, and what we've seen, just sort of going back to the COVID thing, one of the things that happened during COVID, and a lot of people are thinking that this is like this is the current charter school movement, next great idea that has occurred, and they're called micro schools. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but this was something that started to catch on first in wealthier areas, right? So you had um, little cul-de-sacs and people saying, well, I know we're all fine, and let's go hire a teacher, and we'll pool our money and we'll pay the teacher $80,000, and we'll get together in my garage first and your basement second. And fundamentally, they started and they were turned out to be quite great ideas for kids. Then we started to find out, and when I say we, those of us who are engaged in sort of the national education policy advocacy front, we found out that it was actually happening in Arizona in the Black community. And a wonderful woman named Janelle Woods started something called the Black Mothers Forum. And she heard about all of these things called micro schools going on, and she's, well, I'm gonna start that here in Arizona. And she did. And the turnout was incredible. And she started 6 centers. And Doug Ducey, at the time, who was the governor, turned around and gave her $2 million in state money and said, this is fantastic. Set up as many of these as you can. And so she started with 10, 15, 20 kids, Black and Hispanic kids and families in different neighborhoods. And she went to some of these strip malls that were closed and some of these buildings, made sure it was all up to snuff with fire code and everything, and started those things. And then she went and found teachers who had been, put on either vacation or something, and said, well, no, you can't teach because the schools are closed. Why don't you come and teach with us? We're going to see if we can get the per pupil student, right, money, because it's the taxpayers' money, and I want to send my child to this education center. that's opened up. And so they were getting funding, and those started to work. They have exploded across the board, and Florida is leading the way in the number of micro schools, but you have them all over, because what people are finding is, especially for children, and I've got a great Pennsylvania story to tell you, but especially for children who were struggling to begin with in a classroom size of 30 or 35 kids, they're now getting the attention that they need. And one of the interesting things about micro schools are they throw children together that aren't age wise the same, but achievement level the same. So you could have a seventh grader who's on a second grade level, and guess who he's with? He or she's with the second graders. But what they find is once they get that attention, they quickly move up to where they should be reading wise, because they were never really had that individualized attention that they needed in, Dwight, to your point, the government run one size fits all school.
It's
So if we go,
interesting. It's like Back to the Future of the 19th century with the one. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the one-room schoolhouse.
no, that is exactly right. And there's a phenomenal gentleman, a pastor in Harrisburg. If you've ever been to Harrisburg, the Capitol sits on one side of the river, and you drive across a bridge to get to another side of the river. Once you cross that bridge, you are in a totally different world. It is predominantly black. It's predominantly a black neighborhood. The achievement levels are rock bottom. The schools are violent. They have terrible challenges with literacy rates and just keeping general order. This black pastor says, "Well, my church is empty. COVID, right? I have this basement parish center. I have 5 different rooms. What if I made those classrooms? People are learning via remote anyway. So, well, hold on. How can I do this? Right? How could I become an education center? I heard these things called micro schools. So we called Janelle. She came up from Arizona. She said, here's what you need to do. And he set up the first one. He partnered with a cyber charter school in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania allows cyber charter schools. So now what you have is you're solving a phenomenal problem. Most families, especially in poorer sections of cities, they don't have the best internet service. They don't have reliable service, and quite frankly, they probably don't have the space to dedicate one room to learning. Right? We're blessed. I'm blessed. My son had one room. My daughter had another room. I worked in a different room, and my wife worked in a different room during COVID. Right? We all had separate rooms. Our internet was strong enough. We could all go about our daily lives. Here, you're talking about smaller 2-bedroom apartments. Who knows what kind of challenges those children are facing. So the pastor said, if they can come here, I can set up an education learning center. I'll serve breakfast and lunch, and they'll be taught by certified teachers that the state of Pennsylvania certified via the internet. And then if they need help, we can have retired teachers here as tutors. So he set up his first micro school. It now has 40 students in it. And what he basically does is he goes to other churches and he sets them up with that pastor. So you have a house of worship, no religion's being taught, because it's a charter. It's at the time, if you're going to make a partnership with a charter, a public charter, they can't teach religion. But when the bell rings at the end of the day, and that day ends whenever you want it to, you could commence with religious learning. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, what he's done is he's taken space that was empty. He's provided a warm, caring environment, and they're getting an education through a cyber charter that is certified and approved, and the curriculum approved by the Pennsylvania State Board of Education. And it's safer and it's individualized. And this has been sweeping the country.
And I think that's, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead. Yep.
As I was saying, that's what, and also I know, like in our area, we got everything's a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers unions in Maryland, pretty much. I think in parts of Northern Virginia, same thing. But this truly, and I know Democrats that are for charter schools, which is a shocker. I mean, this really should not be a partisan issue. Don't they always say it's always about the children? I mean, this would solve a lot of problems for a lot of these schools and say, I mean, MCPS, there's still really good schools here. But like Baltimore City, Prince George's County, some of the shore counties, where you have one high school servicing 2 or 3 counties down there. I think charter schools would be beneficial to some of the rural schools,
Well, Dwight, if you sorry to interrupt, but if you remember, what was it, 3-4 years ago, where you had absolutely no high school in Baltimore that had students. I think one had a 0% achievement in reading and math.
Yep.
And they had 5 or 6 that were, at 0.
Right.
Yep.
And when they tried to question the Board of Education members, they ran into their offices and locked the door. I mean, if there was any state that was desperate for some sort of opportunity, I mean, basically what you're telling those children, those families, we need you to stay uneducated and poor for the rest of your life. And that's what we're doing. You made a promise. Your promise as a government is send your child to us and we will educate them so that they have a shot at the American dream. So what does it mean when they graduate and they can't read at grade level or can't do math at grade level? You've broken your promise. So there's no consequences for elected officials or a government when you've broken your promise fundamentally to educate the next generation.
That's true.
Very, very well put. We're kind of at the end of the show. If you've got any announcements to something to promote, we'd love to hear about it.
Well, I'll quickly answer your question. What you asked me, Mark, of what my personal choice is. My personal choice is that families are given every option available, whether it's homeschool, micro school, charter school, private school, or your traditional public school works for you. That's great. That's educational choice. And if you want to make that choice and it works for your kid, that's what you should do. But every dollar of yours should follow to the school that you go to. Simple, straightforward, nothing more. Right. But yes, one of the most exciting things that's going on is actually at the federal level. And I know we always say education is a state level issue. And I always agree with that. I think, local decisions on education should be made, and it shouldn't be the federal government. But right now they are pushing an Educational Choice for Children Act, both in the Senate and the House. And President Trump has stated that he will support it, but fundamentally, it is a tax credit that people would get for donating to a scholarship granting organization, which is an SGO, and then families could go to apply for those scholarships in those states. So basically, you could get a tax credit on your federal taxes if you are giving to a designated SGO at the state level, state and local level. And I think that's phenomenal news. If you can start to stop the flow of wasted money that goes from the federal government to the states, I can't begin to tell you how many billions of dollars was wasted during COVID with, oh no, we'll give it for new ventilation systems. Well, you still see schools in urban cities saying, no, we never got a chance. Well, what did you do with all of the ESSA money? What did you do with all the gear funds? It's just been insane. So if you can start to divert a great deal of this money into simple, straightforward tax credits and accountable funds for dollars to follow children, you know exactly what happens to it.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and we're out of time. That means it's time for us to head over to Musante's in this cold evening.
I'm a more of a Galway Bay guy. The whiskey collection there is fantastic.
I do. That is actually the place. That's my favorite place. Whenever I go up there during session a couple times, have lunch with legislators. That we go there. It's quiet. Not too many reporters around.
It is a wonderful place. It is a mecca for a whiskey drinker like myself.
Yeah. Well, Musante's is Bob Ehrlich's press guy's daughter's restaurant over in Perry Hall. Great Italian food. It is. If you're ever hankering for good Italian, just drive up there.
Well, a guy like a last name Musante, well, you know, what can I say?
Mike, it's been great. It's great having you on, and we hope you could announce more progress the next time we see you.
Yeah.
Great. Happy to, and give me a call. Happy to be on whenever whenever you want to hear about education.
Yeah, let's not wait 3 years this time.
No, we can definitely do it sooner. I got plenty of time. Happy to.
Great. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
We're not clear yet. We're not clear yet. We're not clear yet. We're not clear yet.